Hello, and welcome to Embracing the Fight. I am Erica Lamar, your digital creator and host. And if you've been with me since January of 2023, you will know that Embracing the Fight is about normalizing the conversation surrounding physical and mental health issues and concerns. Now, what does that mean? That means when you walk up to someone and they say, "How are you doing?" and you actually tell them how you're doing and they don't, judge you and they don't freak out or they don't walk away from you, that's exactly what that means. It means being able to speak about the things that concern you physically and mentally without judgment. Imagine if the world were to be that way. Imagine if you could just speak out and someone could hear your cry and bring you resources and information to help you get through the situation. Now, if you are one of these people and you want to tell your story, I would also love to have you come on Embracing the Fight. Now, how would you do that? Just send me a message at operations at diversity designed, or you can also find me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, and X as Embracing the Fight. The only difference on Instagram is Embracing the Fight underscore. Now that I've gotten all of that out of the way, you will see that I have a very beautiful guest on the screen today, and her name is Mrs. Rhonda Nelson. But before we introduce Miss Nelson, I would like for you all to know the amazing title for today's episode. So, Miss Nelson, what is the episode title for today? It's episode 113.
It's called Let Me Breathe the Air.
See, I know everybody's wondering already because normally when we start, we talk about, how we met and all that sort of thing, but we actually didn't meet. So I'm going to tell you how this actually came about, and then I'll let her explain why she named the episode what she named it. So I actually cast a net out because I was finding it difficult lately to get people to come on Embracing the Fight, not because they didn't want to tell their story, but because a lot of people think that their stories are insignificant. And you have no idea of how important it is to tell your story and to tell your testimony. So when I cast this net, Miss Nelson's PR company reached out to me and said, "Hey, she'd love to be on the show." And here she is. So, Miss Nelson, can you tell us why you named episode 113, Let Me Breathe the Air?
Well, we're going to be talking about a disease that I have. It's a respiratory disease called AERD, also known as Aspirin Exacerbated Respiratory Disease.
Mhm.
And also, there is my husband, Wayne Nelson, is in the band called Little River Band, and they have a very popular song called Cool Change. And Let Me Breathe the Air is one of the lyrics in that song. And it just really resonates because let's face it, breathing is not optional. We have to be able to do it. So
Mhm.
that's where we came up with the name.
All right, I love it. So, my question is, what exactly? Well, you gave the acronym AERD, and it's aspirin exacerbated respiratory disease. What exactly happens? I mean, how did you find out that you had this disease, this disorder?
So this is why it's so important for me to share my story and to get this out there because when I first was diagnosed with this disease, it was not very well known. It still is not a common disease, if you will. It is a disease that there is no cure for, and it is a disease that mimics other issues and diseases, if you will.
Mhm.
So my story started back in 2000,
Mhm.
and I had what I thought was a cold, or when I got sick, I wasn't in my home state. And so I thought
Mhm.
possibly, well, if it's not a cold, it could be just seasonal allergies and what was going on where I was.
Mhm.
Um, I came back home and I wasn't getting any better. I was actually getting worse.
Okay.
And so then you start on the path to figure out what's going on, right?
Mhm.
And I was completely, my nasal passages were completely blocked. I was struggling to breathe. I was having what I now know are asthmatic flares
Mhm.
because the backstory to this is I'd never experienced asthma as a child or an adult. I had never had any issues with sinus infections, nasal polyps, anything like that. The occasional seasonal hay fever, but nothing that couldn't be treated with OTC drugs, over the counter medications. And, never really had any allergies to anything either. So this was all very, very new to me.
Okay.
And it seemingly came out of nowhere.
Okay. So at this point, when you were thinking it was a cold, 9 times out of 10, when a person has a cold, they'll take aspirin. They'll take something that has aspirin in it. And that was actually making it worse. Correct?
Correct. Yes.
All
And
right.
it was creating these asthmatic attacks, but I didn't realize that that's really what they were at the time.
Okay. And how long did you deal with this before you actually got it diagnosed?
2 years.
2 years.
Uh, yeah, I got sick in January of 2000, and it
Mhm.
wasn't until the last quarter of 2002 that I was diagnosed. And I had moved to another state. And honestly, I was lucky enough to find the allergist that when
Mhm.
I went into him and shared my symptoms and told him what was going on, he said, he knew exactly what I had. Now, ironically, he had just returned from a week-long conference
Mhm.
um, studying this very specific disease.
Wow.
Back then, it was called Samter's, SAMMTER apostrophe S, Samter's triad. They
Mhm.
now refer to it as AERD, but and truly, I just feel like the good Lord put him in my path because I had struggled, I mean, really, really bad for 2 years.
Mhm. So when you say struggled, what exactly were you dealing with? Were you dealing with these asthmatic flares very often, or was it just like a certain time of year that had you thinking, okay, it's still just a cold and it's happening around this time, it just lingers much longer? Or, what was going on?
So I was struggling with the fact that the nasal polyps had completely impacted all of my sinus cavities.
Wow.
So I was not able to breathe through my nose at all.
Hmm.
Um, I also struggled with chronic sinus infections because of those. And then I would have asthmatic flares. Just, I mean, literally, there would be times I can tell you a story. I was in a hotel room with my husband on the road on the tour, and I walked in, and the air from the air conditioning system, there was mold in the air, and it sent me into an asthmatic anaphylactic shock, actually, and I ended up in the ER. So I was struggling with this, and we couldn't quite get a hold on it. And so because it wasn't relatively well known, you know, the Band-Aid was prednisone. And that has its own issues for sure.
Yes. I know whenever you hear of people taking prednisone, it's usually weight gain and other
Mhm.
issues. Did you experience that or did you experience other issues related to it?
Weight gain, moon face,
Mm.
hair loss, and then of course long-term usage of that drug you can have it affects your joints, it can affect your liver, it can affect your teeth. So yeah, I did. But listen, back then,
Hmm.
there were not a lot of great pharmaceutical drugs for this particular condition. We
Hmm.
did something called aspirin desensitization, which means you basically start out with a very small milligram dosage of aspirin, and you work your way up to, at the time, the protocol was 600 milligrams,
Hmm.
to where you take that with no reaction whatsoever. Mine, because it was done back in 2002, and the physician had not done he had only done two of them
Hmm.
in his career. Mine was done in the ICU, but it also was done because I was such a severe case.
Hmm.
So the first part of that, and this was like an all day
Hmm.
protocol. the first dose, I was given a half of a baby aspirin and I went into anaphylactic shock. So
Oh,
then they give you the albuterol to recover you from that. And then you have to keep working up until you take 600 milligrams with no reaction whatsoever. Now, and then what happens is you are on a daily protocol of aspirin. For me, it was 325 milligrams of aspirin a day.
okay.
So people probably are going, how did that work with your stomach? Because we
Right.
also know that aspirin is hard on your stomach. We
Mhm.
also know that aspirin causes you to, large doses of aspirin causes you to bruise more easily, and it causes you to bleed more easily.
Mhm.
And so if you, a lot of this protocol is not the same anymore because we've come so far in advancement in the 25 years.
Mhm.
But back then, if I were going to have any major dental work or have a surgery, you had to come off of the aspirin for X amount of time. Um, I took coated aspirins. Knock on wood, I didn't have any digestive issues with it. But then there other drugs came around and they worked relatively well. But I think now we are in a situation where we have biologics on the scene, and the biologics are proving to work really well for patients with AERD.
I was curious, when you were talking about having to take the aspirin and they're, ramping it up. Each
Mm-hmm.
time I'm glad that you didn't have any issues, with your stomach at all. But you mentioned that you were treated in the ICU. Did
Mm-hmm.
any of these um dosages cause you to have to go back to the ICU when they were testing you, or was this just okay? They tested me, I went into anaphylactic shock, and I went to the emergency room. I was given albuterol and I was fine, or was there extended periods of time that you weren't well when they were giving you these different?
So I we did it all in one day. I
Okay.
went in the morning and I left late in the evening. My physician actually stayed.
Mhm.
Again, I'm a true believer in that the good Lord puts things in your place, right? And in your life. And so he was amazing.
Mhm.
He stayed. He would do rounds and he'd come back, and but he never was far. His office was across the street.
Mhm.
And so each time they would give me the dosage of aspirin, I would have the anaphylactic shock. They would administer the albuterol right there, and
Mhm.
then because then albuterol causes your heart to race pretty bad.
Mhm.
And so I had to come down from that, and then we would do the aspirin again. And it would little by little, as your body started to become desensitized to aspirin,
Mhm.
um, the reactions were a little less and a little less. And then once, I took 300, or sorry, I took 600 milligrams twice with
Mhm.
no reaction. And then we knew, okay, we're good. We're good to
Okay.
go.
Okay. And now, though, since they got you to a point where you're desensitized to aspirin, what happens when you have a headache or when you have some other pain that requires aspirin? Do you have to, try something, a different type of
So
pill?
I am no longer desensitized to aspirin. When I had my last polyp removal, it was in 2011.
Mhm.
And again, I am one of the fortunate ones that the medications that I've been on really control my polyp regrowth, because it is very common for AERD patients and patients that just have nasal polyps to have them removed, and they can start to grow back within a matter of 6-8 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Um, it's common for people to have multiple surgeries.
Mhm.
The medications I've been on, as far as the nasal polyps go, have been really, really well controlled.
Mhm.
But after my 2011 surgery, I chose not to be desensitized to aspirin again because the other medications I was on, they were working well enough that I didn't feel like that I needed to do that portion of the protocol.
And because they know that it can be treated, but it can't be cured, do they know the source of what causes it? Or,
Not really.
okay.
Not really. It's a little bit of a mystery. It's not classified as an autoimmune disease, but
Mhm.
if we look at a lot of its characteristics, and if you want to get down into the weeds of the chemistry of it, There are a lot of things that correlate with some of the autoimmune diseases.
Mhm.
I would be very shocked if in the coming years of research we don't tie it to autoimmune. We know a lot of it has to do with inflammation in the body,
Mhm.
and a lot of autoimmune diseases are exactly that. They create a lot of inflammation in the body. So, but no, there are. It's not inherited.
Mhm.
Um, so there's really not an answer for that, which is frustrating within its own right.
Mhm.
For someone with a personality like mine, I want to know the why, right?
Yes.
So, but I don't know why. So it's the $1 million question. Um, I will say now a couple of things that for patients who think they may be experiencing this,
Mhm.
and really the best way to know it is because sinus infections, chronic sinusitis and rhinitis, asthma, a lot of people have those. So how do you know what may be AERD and what may
Right.
not be? And the biggest way to know that is if you do take medications or you do take aspirin or NSAIDs and you have some kind of reaction, start to document that and take that to your physician and share that, because that's usually the missing link that is overlooked most often and causes the most misdiagnosis.
Okay. And that leads me into you being an advocate for AERD or people who have AERD. So could you tell me a little bit about that? What is your life's work with that?
So I got him. I found Allergy and Asthma Network,
Mhm.
which is an amazing organization, not only for AERD patients, but
Mhm.
for any patient that has any kind of allergies or asthma or eczema, or just there's so many diseases that fall under the network's umbrella. So I
Mhm.
highly recommend um, checking out their website, and because it's just a wealth of resources. But anyway, my story with that becomes I got involved with them, gosh, I don't know, maybe 6, 7 years ago. And one of the things that they do is they have something called Capitol Hill Day in May of every year. And so we, as patients and supporters and volunteers, we go to Capitol Hill, and whatever bills that are they are working on at the time. For instance, one year it was getting EpiPens and albuterol into the schools. Whatever those are, we go and we talk to the legislators and the congressmen and just support these bills. And so that's how I got involved with Allergy Asthma Network. And since then, I've just become a real advocate, because AERD is really often misdiagnosed, it's often misunderstood,
Mhm.
it is not well known, resources are hard to find,
Mhm.
and the medications are extremely expensive. And so, all of those things are things that I'm just passionate about. I feel
Mhm.
like there are a lot of diseases out there that are very well known. They have the same issues, but you're talking about a disease that's not well known with these issues compounded. So that just compounds the problem. Subsequently, I now sit on their executive board. I've
Mhm.
been on the board for 3 years, and it truly is, part of their mission is to, you know, make available affordable health care
Mhm.
and medications. That's just really part of a big part of the work that they do.
Okay.
And for me, I can't speak about that enough, because it's infuriating to me that people live with diseases, not only AERD, but any kind of disease. And some of these medications are so out of reach for
Right.
the patient. And those medications are key to giving quality of life back to patients.
Mhm. It's interesting that you say that because I have a disorder called factor V Leiden. And
Okay.
I didn't find out that I had this until I had thyroid cancer. and they were going to do, surgery to have it removed and everything. And before I went in to have surgery, I was hearing, sounds like
Mm-hmm.
in my ears. And I was like, I don't know what this is, but it is annoying. No matter which way I turn my head, it sounds like the ocean is rushing by, and I'm at work, not on the beach. So that would have been that wasn't a good thing for me. But they sent me to my gynecologist, actually is the one who found it. And she sent me to a hematologist, and he tested and found out that I had factor V Leiden. And with that, that means my body produces blood clots more often than not. So I have to take Eliquis. Well, if a person doesn't have like health insurance or anything like that, Eliquis is almost $1,500 for 1 month supply. And that would be just one pill a day. Some people take 3 pills a day. So
Mm-hmm.
that means that's 3 times this number. So that's
Yeah.
$4,500, dollars or more.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, how do we bring these things back into reach? But the type of work that you're doing is helping to do that. I believe it's helping to bring those things closer.
Well, and I believe what you're doing with the podcast is also a key component of that, because the more we talk
Thank you.
about this, the more we don't shy away from these topics, and they're sensitive topics. I mean, and let's face it, healthcare right now, it's a very hot spastic topic right now.
Yeah.
And one, so I take a biologic.
Mm-hmm.
I take one shot a month. That
Mm-hmm.
shot is $5,500 a month
Wow.
without insurance. The other medication that I take now, I used to take 4 pills a day.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need this medication as often. I still do take it, especially in high pollen seasons like now or in the fall. But that particular medication for a month is $3,200.
Goodness.
It's cost prohibitive to a lot of people. Not only, and so then you say, okay, well, you have insurance. Yes, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll just be transparent. My insurance is $1,700 a month. Now, do I want to pay $1,700 a month versus the almost $10,000 a month for my medicine? Yes, but we shouldn't have to be discussing that insurance is $1,700 a month. And
Right.
so and if you don't have an insurance that can cover these classes of drugs,
Mm-hmm.
there are programs out there, but the money's run out very quickly. A lot of patients can't even get through a year. And then sometimes patients have insurance, but what we see is their copay for the medication is prohibitive. And so we have to keep talking about these things. We have to keep these things in the forefront
Mm-hmm.
and in the light, because we all deserve to be able to afford the medications that give us a quality of life over our disease. We deserve to dictate what our life is,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to having a disease dictate what our life is.
That's right. I wholeheartedly agree, because you have so many people that die from different diseases because they cannot afford the medication, and they cannot find a resource that will help them to afford it, and they'll just do without it as long as they can. And then either their quality of life changes or they lose their life. And that's such a sad reality.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But another thing that I noticed is that you are a published author. Could you tell us a little bit about your book?
I am. It's called A Different Life. And back in 2016, like I said, my husband is in Little River Band,
Mhm.
and they've been around this year 50 years. He's been with them 45 years.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to share a little bit about my life, his life, our life on the road, the
Mhm.
things that we are able to give back to communities
Mhm.
because of the path of Little River Band.
Mhm.
And I also wanted to share that we are just real people like everyone else. I think sometimes, um, especially in the world of the internet, celebrity status can be overblown, and people seem to uh, view celebrities, if you will, as people that are untouchable or that don't experience the same highs and lows or problems that everybody else does. And that's so far from the truth, but it's also, I just wanted people to understand that we're real people. We share the same highs, the same lows in our life, the same tragedies, the same highlights. And so I did the book, and it's really a coffee table book, because the two universal languages of the world are music and food, right? So I tell a lot of stories in the book, and then I share a lot of beautiful recipes, not only just from my family, but from my husband's family, from other band members, and some from friends. And so it's not a deep, difficult tell-all book by any means. It's really just a wholesome, easy read, warm, loving type of book.
But we need more of that in the world. If someone were interested to get a copy of this book, how could they do it?
Reach out to me at rhondabnelson.com is the easiest way.
Okay. And is this the same place where they can find more information about AERD, or is there some other platform that you have?
I I would direct people to two websites, which is allergyasthmanetwork.org. And then also it's the Samter Society, specifically about AERD. So it's samtersociety.org. And that is SAMTERS society.org. It's a wealth of information. There's also some great Facebook groups for AERD. And in those files, and also on samtersociety.org, there's links to finding physicians in your area who are well versed in this disease, amongst all kinds of other information.
Okay. And if say I meet someone today and they tell me that they have AERD, what type of encouragement can you give them, because they're experiencing all these things and they don't know, what is to come in their future? What type of encouragement would you give them?
Just not to give up hope, because the treatments are so advanced now that finding the right doctor, using the resources that are out there, finding the right doctor or doctors, and advocating for what is right and works for, or is wrong and doesn't work for your body. I would also say, I didn't do this. I talk about this a lot now because it does help. Journal all of the things that are going on with your body. If you're struggling for a diagnosis, journal it all down, take it into your physicians, use the resources that we've mentioned today to find those doctors that are well versed in the disease, and then advocate, just advocate for yourself, and don't give up hope. There's wonderful medications out there now, and there are a lot of non-conventional therapies that help. I do red light therapy, chiropractic care, acupuncture, lymphatic massage, infrared sauna, cupping, all of these things. While scientifically, I don't even, scientifically, science says maybe those things are helpful, maybe they're not. What I say about them is, I know the things that help me in my body. And so don't be afraid to do those in conjunction with the things that your physician prescribes for you.
Okay. And would you suggest that a person continue to exercise as well? Because I know when we first got on the call and started talking, you were happy that you were getting in some exercise, and I was happy that I was getting in a little walking and a little sunlight. So would you suggest that they exercise as well, or?
Absolutely. And the hardest part about it is prior to diagnosis, or if you're struggling, especially with the nasal polyps and they're blocking your pathway, or your asthma is flaring and you're struggling with exercise induced asthma, a simple walk, it do things that are easier than maybe doing cardio or something like that. But all of those things will keep inflammation down in your body. And that is one key. It's a very small component, but it is one component that will help you to get to a better controlled disease situation.
Okay. So what you're making me curious now. What other components can they, you know, try or impact or, to help improve their condition when dealing with this disease?
So, like I said, I do infrared sauna.
Mhm.
I do cold plunge. I do acupuncture. I do cupping. Now, I want to preface this by saying I don't do all of these things every single day. I don't even do all of them every single week because, cupping and acupuncture, sometimes I I know my body well enough now to know when I need these things and when I don't,
Yeah.
um, or how often. For instance, I just went to the chiropractor yesterday because I realized, it had been several weeks, and I could tell. I just knew I needed to go.
Mhm.
So you have to gauge those. I will say even as much as about a year and a half ago, I was doing a lot of these things multiple times a week because I was in a situation where one of the biologics I had been taking had really had a horrible side effect of joint issues, and it really wreaked havoc on my joints. So I was trying to rehabilitate my joints to get back to pre-medication status with my joints. But red light therapy, grounding, acupuncture, cupping, lymphatic massage, infrared sauna, um, all of these things, supplements. The one thing I will say about supplements,
Mhm.
please, 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 please always check with your physician before you take supplements in conjunction with medications, because there are ones that don't play well, if you will, with others, and they don't work well. So, but I am a big believer in those.
Mhm.
I use them daily, and I just, but again, these are the things that work for me. And so I just encourage people to find all of those things that work for them. And I will say this also, back when we first got our first sauna, I have one at home. They were pretty cost prohibitive. But it was something that my husband felt like would really benefit me. Now there are things that have come on the market, fast forward 20 some odd years.
Mhm.
There are sauna blankets, there are portable saunas that are much, much, much more affordable. Red light therapy, you can get reasonable red light panels. You don't need 10 panels, one panel will do it. So there are things out there that are um, more affordable now to be able to participate in these non-conventional therapies.
And when you said that cold plunge therapy, I was like, oh my goodness, she is in this ice cold water. I can understand, it's good for information because you literally shocked your body into, shrinking because the water is so cold. What made you think to try that?
I'd read some research on it, and I had started to do in the shower. At the end of my shower, I would turn the hot water completely off. I'd let the cold water run, and then I would just stand under it, right? And let it hit my head and run down on me.
Mhm.
And I started to realize, like, I just felt like it was just, especially in times in the fall and in the spring when I suffer the most with the pollen and everything in the air. I felt like it was just really helpful.
Wow.
I also knew that there would be nights when I would have a flare and I'd be completely congested and whatever. And I would go straight for it stays in the freezer. It's pliable, but it's really a cold cap. It's a frozen cold cap, right? And I knew that helped me. So I figured that this couldn't do anything but be positive. Now I will tell you, it is not for the faint of heart, and it is. Um, I'm lucky if I can sit in there for longer than 2 minutes. I don't know that I don't know that I've even ever gotten to 3 minutes.
Mhm.
And it's cold. It's like 40 degrees. And while that doesn't sound cold, when
Yeah.
you're submersing your body in 40-degree water, it's very cold. And what I just found that I do, I have music on, and it's songs. And so I sing along with the songs so that it distracts my mind. Um,
You are tough because I don't know if I could sing along.
And listen, I will be truthful. I did not do it in the winter. Like
Okay.
I absolutely didn't do it because I it's just too cold. But I would get out of the sauna and then go stand outside, when it's 20 degrees. But that's still different. It's not the same as being submerged in the water.
Is there anything else that you want to share concerning your journey with AERD?
No, I just, again, I just can't speak enough about um, not giving up hope. I remember the early days before I had a diagnosis, and I felt depleted. Sometimes because you're not breathing well, your body's not getting enough oxygen, so you're very fatigued. You feel drained all the time. And one of the hardest things is that from the outside we look perfectly healthy, right? So a lot people don't understand what you go through. And I just encourage people, don't give up hope. Seek out those resources, use those resources, and really, try to create a medical team or a physician that is passionate about helping you overcome this disease.
Okay. And if you guys can't tell, she is a very beautiful, very tough, amazing lady. Because
Thank you.
outside of advocating for ARD and for fighting for her own health, she's also an advocate for foster care. Would you talk to us some about that too?
I I guess, and I don't want this to come across wrong, but I've always been a supporter of the underdog, if you will. And I feel like the foster care system, while I was never in the foster care system, I've never been, other than, just working, doing the work that I do and volunteering for the system, I've never been involved in the system.
Mhm.
But I've always felt like it is an area that gets little light shown on it. It's not something that people talk about very much. And it's a system that in many states is needs a lot of help. And the other component is the kids, because children are our future. And if we don't help those children, we are actually hurting our society as a whole. And I also feel like that every child deserves a wonderful childhood, right? So I was a CASA at first, which is a court appointed special advocate. And the child that I was a CASA for actually got adopted during COVID. And at the time I lived in Arizona. And so everything was online. And I didn't want to take another case um, online because I chose to work with the younger children. And I just felt like that would be extremely difficult because as a CASA, you need to form a relationship with the child where they trust you. Quite often, a CASA could be one of the most consistent people in that child's life. And so I just felt like trying to build a relationship like that with a younger child virtually would probably be very challenging.
Mhm.
So there is something called the Foster Care Review Board. And basically, it's a group of volunteers. Cases are referred to foster care review boards by the judge, and we are a complete neutral party that will listen to all parties involved in the case and then make recommendations to the judge about that case. And so while everybody in the case has a representative. The child has a guardian ad litem or an attorney or both. They have a CASA. DCS is involved. Bio mom, bio dad, grandparents. Everybody's got their own representation, right?
Mhm.
And while the whole goal is for what is best for the child, human nature says
Mhm.
That doesn't always come, and not everyone agrees because everyone's got their own representation.
Right.
And it's the representative's job to have the best interest of their client at hand. So it kind of becomes this mishmash, if you will, of opinions and thoughts and processes. And so Foster Care Review Board looks at everything neutrally, but we are the ones that have absolutely the child's best interest at heart, but we're looking at the whole entire case and we make recommendations to the judge. So I was on 2 foster care review boards in Arizona, and then 2 years ago we moved back to Tennessee, and I'm on foster care review board here, and it just truly warms my heart to be able to give back to that area of work.
Mhm. Well, you know what, that just hearing you talk about being a CASA, I am now interested because I didn't know something like that, existed. Because I don't have any kids of my own, but
Mhm.
I absolutely love children. And I was considering being a foster parent, but I was like, okay, I might move. And if I move, then I'd be moving this child around. I don't necessarily want to do that. But if I wanted to become a CASA, then I could form a relationship and make sure that I'm an advocate for this child. How would you go about becoming a CASA?
So just in your area, and even to your listeners, just Google CASA. I believe I'm not sure if it's still the same in all states in the
Mhm.
country. Some of them are called guardian ad litems.
Mhm.
Some of them are called CASA. CASAs are volunteers,
Mhm.
and I would say just use Dr. Google, if you will, for that. And, just find out from or you could call your local DCS
Mhm.
office and just ask them about it. And I have to say, it is an amazing, amazing organization. It's so fulfilling because like I said, quite often a CASA is the most constant and consistent person in a child's life. And I have seen so many beautiful relationships between CASAs and children,
Mhm.
and where even CASAs still keep in touch with the child once they've aged out of the system and they are young adults. And it is a very much needed. I know CASA organizations all over the country, just they desperately need volunteers.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you share that because I have a lot of friends that don't have kids, that love kids, that have the time, that have the energy, that have the resources, and they can do that. I just didn't
And
know.
it truly, it's not a huge commitment.
Mhm.
It's a few hours a month.
Mhm.
And when we think about it, we spend an hour in a Starbucks in one sitting, right? So if you take how many times you go to Starbucks and you're sitting there working, the commitment, the time commitment is really not very much at all.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that as well. Is there anything else that you would like to share with my listeners?
I don't think so. I think we've covered so much and it's been such a great conversation. It's, and I can't thank you enough for this type of podcast and for talking about the things that people don't often want to talk about.
Yeah, it's you have no idea. It's very, very tough, to do it because like I was saying in the beginning, when you start talking to people, they're like, well, my story, it won't really help anybody. It was just me and it, just caused it. You have no idea, how your story is going to affect so many people, both sides of it, the AERD and the foster care work that
Absolutely. And, I'm a true believer that if my story only helps one person, that's big,
you
right?
do.
Because then that person's story might help another person, and then it just keeps growing. So
Yeah.
it's a definite need for sure.
Yeah. And you also proven that no matter what you may have going on in your life, that you can still make a difference in other people's lives. And I'm grateful that your PR team thought enough of embracing the fight to have you come on today. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's been a real pleasure.
And thank you to all the listeners out there for taking your time out to watch this episode of Embracing the Fight. And as always, I want you all to have an absolutely amazing day.